Okay, so this is going to be stream days 1 through 4, since the last ones I did and posted were no audio. So I'm just going to live stream these 4 days together. As you can see, I am here on the Emily Show channel, so I'm just going to go here to her playlist on
the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is retrying.
We're going to do that and start from day 1. You can find hers
Tuesday, it's April 20.
So I'm just going to let these all play through, and I will break them up as we go along. So
22nd, 2025. We are here for day 1 of the retrial of Karen Read. Yes, the retrial. She started trial in 2024 on April 29th, 2024. And we are all back here again. So today we are going to get into opening statements. Remember, before opening statements, there's a whole bunch of jury instructions that have to be read. So we're going to get through a whole bunch of jury instructions before we get to opening statements. At the end of day 1, we have seen opening statements. Net, I think the prosecution's opening statement was far better than it was last trial. And I think the defense simplified their defense. They made it very clear at the beginning of their opening that John O'Keefe was not hit by a car. And they focused on the investigation. They focused on the lack of investigation at 34 Fairview. And they focused on the evidence that will show in their argument that John O'Keefe was not hit by a car. The prosecution did not focus on that it was snowing, but focused on Karen Read's statements, said that Karen Read was the one covering things up, that she knew exactly where to find John O'Keefe because that is where she left him. Focused on the statement where she said, when I last saw him, and I'm paraphrasing because it's been a very long day, when I saw him, he was not mortally wounded or mortally injured. Dateline, October 18th.
I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in his drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
And so overall, I think the opening statements were far better. And I think they gave the jury 2 very different versions of the case. And I imagine at the end of that, the jury was like, witness 1 was an interesting choice because it was firefighter paramedic Nuttall, who had the furrows last trial.
Like furrows down.
Say that again?
Furrows, if you will, for lack of a better term. Just
I don't understand that word.
So if you remove something,
Yes.
like you create a furrow in the skin, is that?
Furrows.
Yes, there you go. Sorry, excuse my accent.
No. I'm on your turf.
And in cross-examination, it was clear that Nuttall's testimony was he heard Karen Read say, I hit him. Then he heard Karen Read say, I hit him. And then it was, I hit him. I don't know if the jury at this point will be like, wait, your first witness has no idea what was said and remembers one thing and doesn't remember anything else. Maybe not. It's kind of a cumulative effect with that. His memory's good as to this, not good as to that. The cross-examination and redirect and direct and redirect got a little bit long on points, but I think at the end of like the recross, Alan Jackson brought it around and said, okay, so first you described it this way, and then in this video you're saying it this way, and now you're saying it this other way. Those aren't all the same.
I remember it, but I questioned, do I remember it because it's been relived so much? I mean, when I see the video of me driving from the waterfall, like what I just described, tapping the brakes when I crossed the intersection, Washington over Sherman Street, do I actually remember that I kind of slowly proceeded through that green light? No, I don't actually remember that. But I've seen the video so many times that you then question, did I remember on my own? Or was my memory jogged? But I also wondered, did I say, could I have hit him? Or was it told to me that I said I hit him? And I knew I never could have said that. So the closest I must have said was, did I hit him? I know I said I hit him, but did I really say it as many times as law enforcement's claiming I said it?
And then the prosecution called Carrie Roberts, who went with Jen McCabe and Karen Read to 34 Fairview that morning. And her testimony stopped for the day right when Karen Read got out of the car and ran towards a mound of snow, how Carrie described it. That's where we ended for the day. Then all the fighting over ARCA. No jury Friday. because it's going to be a full voir dire day of ARCA on Friday. But the jury will be back tomorrow on Wednesday, and so will I. I will start around the same time court starts. How will you know exactly what time Emily D. Baker starts? Well, EDB is on EDB standard time. We got to have time to get there. So lawnerdapp.com will let you know when we're starting. Court has been starting a little bit late.
Okay, so that was the end of day 1 summary. So we're going to move into summary of day 2. And then I keep trying to move my box around. I might just take it off. But so we're going to move into day 2. Day 2's clip is about 17 minutes long, give or take. So just a moment. And we have to go ahead and share this. Okay, so this is going to be day 2. It's about, give or take, 17 minutes. So, and if my box keeps getting in the way, I'll just remove it altogether, but we'll see. Oh.
Day 2, take 2. It is Wednesday, April 23rd. It's day 2 of the Karen Read retrial. Karen Read, trial 2, day 2, take 2. Today, I expect we're going to resume with Carrie Roberts, who was on the stand when we finished yesterday. And then we will see where the day develops. The Commonwealth is going in a completely different witness order than last time. Last time, it seemed they were going in order of arrival to 34 Fairview. And this time, it seems like they are trying to really tell the jury the whole story and then fill in the pieces. But we know that there's still an ongoing fight over ARCA, and that I don't think is going to cease anytime soon because the Commonwealth is just Commonwealthing. So I expect we will see the attorneys talking about that this morning before we even
bring the jury.
It's going to take a minute. Buckle up for day 2, everybody.
Isn't it true that you were next asked by Mr. Lally in front of the grand jury?
Oh, we
quote,
knew.
What, if anything, did she, Ms. Reed, ask Ms. McCabe while they were sitting in the back of the cruiser that you heard? End quote. Remember being asked that question?
No.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Well, we did get a what if anything this trial on day 2.
Yes.
And in response to that question,
You said,
you stated, quote, at one point she asked her to Google hypothermia and how long Google hypothermia. Correct?
Mhm.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
I'm interested
That
to
was
see.
very detailed. You'll agree that
Where
that's a
he's
very
going with that.
detailed and specific recount of an event. You recounted where you were, back of a cruiser, or they were in the back of a cruiser, correct?
Yep.
You're so detailed that you talked about where you were standing next to the cruiser open door, correct?
Yes.
What the others were doing, holding hands and praying, is that right?
Yes.
And the actual words used, you're as detailed about all of that as the actual words used. She asked her to Google hypothermia and how long, and then you stopped, Google hypothermia, end quote, correct?
Correct.
You will agree, at least for that purpose, you painted a very, very detailed picture in front of the grand jury, didn't you?
Yeah.
Except it's not true, is it?
I did not hear her ask that. I was told she was asked that. In
The
the
answer to my question, Ms. Roberts.
But it's not true.
Not a trick question. What you told the grand jurors was not true. You never heard her, my client, ask anyone to Google anything, did you?
I did not.
And yet that's what you testified to under oath, under penalty of perjury in front of the grand jury, didn't you?
I did.
And the reason you did that, the reason that you said that false statement was because someone told you to say it, correct?
Object.
Is that, I'm going to let her answer.
Yeah, let her answer
Nobody
it.
told me to say it. I knew it happened at that time.
How did you
Which is
know it
why I
happened?
said it.
How did you know it happened, Ms. Roberts, if no one told you it happened?
Because we wrote a timeline. We already spoke about
So
that.
the timeline that Jennifer McCabe helped you with, that influenced your testimony in front of the grand jury, correct?
Notice how he used the word influenced.
I was telling what happened in the back of the cruiser.
The timeline
You can answer.
you wrote,
So when you ask a question, let her answer, okay?
timeline you wrote, Jennifer McCabe's help influenced your testimony to testify in front of the grand jurors to a statement that you never heard, correct?
Yes.
When you were being interviewed by law enforcement, did you ever?
When you were being interviewed? That was not the slip to make, sir.
All right, Ms. McKay, I'm sorry.
No! Your Honor, no! Even the judge. Thank you, Miss McCabe. Holy shit. Yesterday, we had very linear, clear testimony from Carrie Roberts. Today, the wheels just came off. I think she tells the clearest recitation of what happens from when she woke up to Karen Reed calling her on the phone, through getting to 34 Fairview, to picking up John's phone, to seeing John in the snow, to everything that happened after, including picking up John's parents later, going to the hospital, going back to One Meadows. I think her retelling of that from the last trial was the clearest. She was not cross-examined last time, and she was cross-examined today. And that cross-examination elicited that at almost every point that Carrie Roberts is asked about her story or her memory of the events, Jen McCabe is right there. And the defense tied Jen McCabe to all of those interviews and then brought up grand jury testimony where Carrie Roberts testified in response to Adam Lally's question, starting with what, if anything, did Karen Reed ask Jen McCabe while they were in the back of a cruiser that you heard? And her response to the grand jury was that she heard, she said at one point, Karen Reed asked Jen to Google, and I wrote it down multiple times because the Google was Google hypothermia or how long, and then it went back to Google hypothermia. So by the time we got through cross-examination, Ellen Jackson's like, but you never heard that. And she said, no, I was told that because she and Jen McCabe sat together before police interviewed Carrie at Jen McCabe's house and put together their timeline. And I think Jackson did a good job of pointing out what she said initially to police, what came in later, when she sat down with Jen McCabe and they started talking about things. On redirect, Prosecutor Brennan's like, did anyone tell you not to talk to people about this? No, which is all of my smoke for law enforcement. All the witnesses should have been interviewed separately. And I think Jackson will be able to use this effectively to point out why the investigation wasn't done well. Because memory is impacted by what people tell you. To her credit, Carrie, for most of that questioning, did not back away from, yes, we sat down and talked about it. Yes, I said, I remember this. What do you remember? Yes, we were trying to piece together what happened in a timeline. But once you piece it together, it's real hard to piece back out what you remember and what you were told. And that was very clear when we got to the grand jury testimony, where she testified that she heard Karen Reed ask Jen to Google hypothermia, when in fact it was Jen McCabe that told her that Karen Reed asked her that. And then it kind of snuck in there that she did in fact see Jen McCabe on the phone. That was in there too. But I don't know if anyone's going to remember it with all the other stuff that was happening. Because it was, so you talked to law enforcement. Who was with you? Jen McCabe. So you were outside the grand jury to give your testimony. Who else was waiting out there? Jen McCabe. So you were here and here and here. Who else was there? Well, I was at Jen McCabe's house. Jen McCabe was in the house, but not sitting with me every single time. To the point that when we got to the end of her testimony, the judge said, thank you, Miss McCabe. I'm sorry, Miss Roberts. But that wasn't the only slip in that testimony, because during redirect, Brennan said, when you were being interviewed, The cross-examination tied together all of the conversations and memories to everyone talking about this together, which I think will effectively be argued. This is why law enforcement should have interviewed everyone close in time to the event separately and recorded it. How do you know what anyone remembers? And how do you know what memories were influenced by what people said? And I don't fault Carrie Roberts for trying to figure out what the fuck happened that morning. She was the only one that wasn't at 34 Fairview and out at the bars and the rest of it. Law enforcement didn't tell her, no, don't talk to anyone. So I'm not surprised she was trying to figure out that same day what happened. And she said that the reason they were making a timeline is because Peggy O'Keefe asked her to. We didn't see Peggy O'Keefe testify before, but we're going to today.
I'm showing Jimmy Curry, look what I just did to my light, and I'm worried that there's gonna be some kind of electric short circuit. There's like the bulb is showing and some of the red plastic's missing. So I picked pieces out of the light housing that had kind of collapsed within the light and dropped them in John's driveway.
After we finished up with Carrie Roberts' testimony, we got into the testimony of John O'Keefe's mother, Margaret or Peggy O'Keefe. It was, of course, emotional testimony. This is a witness who has lost not only her daughter and her son-in-law, but also then her other son. So it was emotional testimony when she talked about losing John O'Keefe, when she talked about his life, when she talked about her grandchildren, John O'Keefe's niece and nephew, who lost their mother and then their father and then their uncle, who was their caregiver. She talked about moving to Canton and living in One Meadows Ave and being with the kids. She talked about the morning, getting the call from Carrie Roberts, going to the hospital, going back to One Meadows Ave, and that was the heart of her testimony. But there was some new information in her testimony, including that Carrie Roberts and John O'Keefe went to high school together and went to junior prom together. Never came up in any of Carrie Roberts' testimony or cross-examination, just didn't come up. It seemed to me in Carrie Roberts' testimony from yesterday, oh, we went to high school together, we both played soccer, we kind of knew each other. Okay. I mean, you also went to prom together. It would have been less weird to me if she had said, yeah, we also went to prom together because we were friends. That would have been less odd to me than it being completely not mentioned until John O'Keefe's mother mentioned it. I think that's what made it so much of a, what? That's a little more than like, oh, we both play the same sport to me. The other thing that was interesting about the testimony is when Peggy O'Keefe was talking about getting to the hospital, she said that she asked a nurse when she saw Karen Reed, what is she doing here? And when describing Karen Reed's demeanor and statements at the hospital, Peggy O'Keefe said she was loud, not distraught, which other people have said about Karen Reed, not upset. It was loud. It seemed to me that there was a distance there and a coldness in her testimony towards Karen Reed, but I didn't necessarily read that as since this event, because it wasn't as if there was fondness and distress at the hospital. And then in the years that have passed, that changed because it seemed to be the true thing at the hospital that Peggy O'Keefe said about Karen Reed, who was dating John O'Keefe for 2 years at that point. What is she doing here? Well, why wouldn't she be there? So that distance was interesting and then illuminated when the prosecution tried to bring in multiple video clips. The jury was excused and there was argument over those video clips from 2 different interviews. One of the clips was the 2020 clip.
They had pulled into the driveway before me, so I was presuming she saw my cracked taillight and was thinking, did you hit my son? I could sense from her that she was looking at me very warily. And then when John's nephew came home, I just wanted to see him and squeeze him and hug him. It was quite uncomfortable. I said, Dad, come upstairs to the master bedroom. I said, I think I need to leave. I said, I think John's mother thinks I did something to John.
And I was surprised that the prosecution wanted to bring that in because the clip seems to explain why Karen Reed was at One Meadows Ave so briefly and why she left. And in light of the testimony from Peggy O'Keefe, the sentiment seemed to match, for me, the way the testimony came in from Peggy O'Keefe, that there was a discomfort there. The prosecution tried to bring in another clip of Karen Read from the outtakes of the Discovery ID series, where Karen Read is mimicking or mocking the way Peggy O'Keefe would have said to her, "I think he looks like he's been hit by a car." And the defense argued heavily against that clip coming in. There's nothing else to that clip. The court took it under submission. We'll see what happens tomorrow. I don't think that clip has evidentiary value. The prosecution was trying to argue these clips come in to show consciousness of guilt, to show that Karen Read had a ruse to remove the murder weapon SUV from One Meadows Avenue. He called it the scene, not the scene, and was arguing that these showed that Karen Read was coming up with a ruse. But I think the witness they put on right before that undercuts that argument. So it's an interesting choice of video. And at one point, when Ellen Jackson realized that they were arguing over that first clip that I think explains Karen Read's behavior without her taking the stand, he was like, "Oh, nope. Withdrawn. Objection withdrawn."
Do it.
Jackson's like, "No, put that in. Put that in. That explains exactly why my client got the fuck out of One Meadows Ave." And I think that it does. The prosecution doesn't see it that way. There are times where I really do struggle to see it the way that they do. So that's where I'm at. You let me know how you see it. I struggle with the way they see it. And then we started getting into testimony of first responders, but not after we had Trooper Garino on the stand briefly to bring in the foundation of cell phone extractions from Karen Read's phone and John O'Keefe's phone. No text messages came in, not further discussion. His testimony wasn't completed. There was no cross-examination by Attorney Alessi yet, but the foundation for Karen Read's phone and John O'Keefe's phone came in. I wonder if we'll see text messages discussed tomorrow. And then we got into the first responder who took Karen Read from 34 Fairview to the hospital for that Section 12 involuntary hold that her father had called in. So we will be continuing with that fifth witness tomorrow morning. I can't believe there would be very many more questions there. And we see a theme growing in the defense cross-examinations, which is, oh, you're the fire paramedic that responded, but you're Carrie Roberts' neighbor. And you guys have served on the board of an organization, not at the same time, but the same organization. And Carrie organizes the block parties in your neighborhood, and you brought the fire truck to the block party, and you went to high school with Trooper Proctor. And Canton's a small town, but you didn't know Karen Read before this. And I think we're going to see that consistency in theme and cross-examinations grow as we move forward. But I think after the fiery morning with Carrie Roberts, will the jury remember the rest of these witnesses if they're not brought up in argument later? Maybe not. Peggy O'Keefe, yes. But the rest of them, it's just giving information until we get to other parts of testimony, which we will be doing tomorrow. So get the law nerd app and I'll see you in court tomorrow. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this.
Okay, so now we are going to go on to day 3. And that one is also about, I think it's about 17 minutes long. So we will go ahead and start on day 3.
It's day 3 of the Karen Read retrial. It is Thursday, April 24th, and we have not gotten through a ton of witnesses, but we've had some of the more important and longer witnesses in the first few days. So what witnesses will be up today? I don't know. We are still on the paramedic. Last trial by day 3, it was very clear that Lally was going in the order of who arrived on scene. That is not the order that we are seeing the Commonwealth go in. Will that be a good thing for the jury? I think having Carrie Roberts come in early, even with that cross-examination, gave the jury at least a timeline of what happened from like 5 a.m. to discovering John O'Keefe to law enforcement showing up to ambulances to Karen Read going to the hospital. I think it gave them that timeline instead of watching the footage of everyone driving to 34 Fairview in the morning. I think it gave the jury the overview of what happened, or at least what her testimony is that happened. And I think A lot of that is corroborated. Some of it is not, but a lot of that is corroborated with other testimony in Karen Reed's own words. So that is where we are really picking up now that we're getting into the paramedic that transported Karen Reed. Will we get into other fire medics? Maybe not. We know it's snowing. We've heard like 3 sentences about it. Maybe we will go to what John O'Keefe's night was like next and get into the family friends. Maybe that's where we're going to get into today, but I'm just not sure. So we're going to go to court. We are going to see what happens.
You wanted a ruling on the clip from yesterday? I did. All right, you can play it. Thank you. All right, so
What? How is that clip evidence? What is it evidence of? Ma'am, that is a mistake.
And his mother leans over the kitchen island and says to me, I think it looks like he got hit by a car. It looks like he got hit by a car.
They weren't allowed to play it yesterday. They wanted to play it yesterday at the same time that they played the previous clip and they couldn't. So yes, it's completely out of context.
When you walked out of the bar, how many drinks had you had?
I have had probably about 4, and not 4 that I completed either. I didn't drink maybe more than a few sips at the waterfall.
And 4 drinks you felt fine to drive?
Yep.
Clip 8, please.
And is the level of intoxication pretty high here for everybody?
It's happy.
Yeah.
It's
You had a lot to drink, right?
I wouldn't say I have like a normal amount. Let's say like a vodka tonic every 40 minutes.
Okay. And so are you feeling like buzzed? I know I'm not judging, I'm just trying to get a
Yeah,
sense.
buzzed.
Yeah.
Clip 9, please.
On how much you had to drink.
The final count
The
the final count of my alcohol intakes probably about 5 or 6 or 4. The drinks that they were pouring me at McCarthy's, which is where I consumed most of the alcohol, was the weakest vodka tonic. It tasted just like all soda water with lime. Not that I need it to be a martini, but it might have had a splash of vodka in it. So I said, John, this drink tastes like it has no vodka in it. And he said, just get a shot and mix it yourself. So each drink was being counted as a double. So I would get a vodka tonic and then I would pour a shot into it. So that would count as 2. But frankly, it just felt like a regular cocktail. It was just a really weak pour. So I asked for a shot. So for my taste, it just tasted like that's the normal strength of what a drink should be. So I had maybe 2 or 3 that are being counted as 4 and 6. And I don't know. I felt fine. I felt like I was buzzed. And then there was one drink, the last one that was given to me, which I would have counted as 3, but they're counting as my 6th cocktail. The guys that we were with bought a round of shots and they gave me one that I didn't drink, but I poured it in my drink. So that's now my 5th and 6th drinks with the 7th, which is a shot that all the men did. And I poured it. So that one glass that I'm holding that I go into the waterfall with has 3 drinks in it, a vodka tonic and 2 shots. And which is why John said to me, you're not leaving that drink here. Like you haven't touched it and just poured a bunch of vodka. He's like, just take it with you, which was something he always did. So then I go into waterfall and I put that drink down and I socialize most of the time. So that would have been my 5th, 6th, and 7th drinks. Then John orders me a drink at the waterfall that I don't drink, that he takes with him. And then there was a round of shots that Chris Albert bought that I did take. So that would have been the 9th. But I did not consume 9 vodka martinis or take 9 shots, depending on how you count it. And the last 2 drinks I didn't touch. I mean, I'm not as clear as I would be if I hadn't been drinking. I mean, I had drank, so, and that led me to question, like, could I have hit him? Did I run over his foot or hit him in the knee? Did I incapacitate him? I mean, I always drive with my music blasting ever since I was 16. And I know when John got out of the car to go into Fairview, I know my car was blasting because when I got in it the next morning to go look for him, I had to immediately turn it down. And I don't know, it's stormy. I have had a few cocktails. I didn't black out, but I wasn't as lucid as I would have been if I had gone to bed at 9 and drank a tea. But so I was fuzzier than I would have been if I had had no alcohol.
Clip 11, please.
How did you feel after that many drinks? When you got in the car, did you feel like you could drive? And did you feel how buzzed?
I wouldn't have gotten on the expressway.
I had enough to drink.
I wouldn't have gotten on the expressway at 12:15 on January 29th. I mean, it was quiet. The roads were very quiet. You can see it on the videos. And I was going, you know, when I've had a few drinks and I drive, I always drive extra slow because I know my alerts aren't as sharp as they should be. But I shouldn't have been driving. But I don't think I was driving. I know I wasn't driving recklessly. I mean, I've got plenty of video of myself driving all over the place. I put my car in John's garage, which is incredibly narrow, and I had a very oversized SUV. You see me. There's a video of me driving through the intersection when we leave Waterfall to go to Brian Albert's. And I was always taught by my father, even when you have a green light, you always should tap the brake. You don't know who's going to run a red. And I see me doing that multiple times between 12 and 1 and 5 and 6 a.m. So I know I was driving safely, not as safely or as alert as I would be if I had no alcohol. But I was not driving recklessly by any measure.
Court ended very early today on day 3 of the Karen Read trial because the court said to the jury there was witness confusion. I don't know why Brennan didn't have witnesses for the rest of the day because the morning witnesses went very quickly. It wasn't even up to the lunch break yet when court ended because they ran out of witnesses for the day, which the court said to the jury, I've been told won't happen again. They had Trooper Garino on the stand at the end of the day going through Karen Read and John O'Keefe's text messages leading up to them getting to CF McCarthy's before they went to the Waterfall, before they went back to 34 Fairview. Could Trooper Garino have brought in more text messages? Probably. Did they do that? No. Then earlier in the day, we had one of John O'Keefe's good friends, Mike Camerano, testify about going to One Meadows, picking John up, taking him over to CF McCarthy's, talking a little bit about John's niece and nephew being friends with his kids. His testimony is just heart-wrenching, but it's also very clear. It is not exaggerated testimony. It is not overwrought. It is just very linear, direct answers to direct questions, which is refreshing to see after this morning's cross-examination that just was so fiery. Yannetti came in so hot, he was just hollering at the witness that ended the day yesterday on the rest of the cross-examination about really fine points of what this witness was saying. And the main argument was over that paramedic saying, well, Karen Read was asking if John O'Keefe could have survived if he was in the snow for a long period of time in light clothing. Could he have had hypothermia? Could he have survived it? And there were points of testimony that were if he was sat in the snow, and there were points of testimony that seemed to be the confusion where Yannetti was asking, but Karen Read wasn't telling you that, she was asking you that. And that got confusing between Yannetti and the witness, which then made it confusing for everyone. But the witness said, no, I've always said she was asking us, could he have survived even if he was in the snow? And the witness is like, I didn't say she told me he was in the snow for hours. And that seemed to be the big point of contention with that testimony to the defense, is that you didn't testify about that before. And now is she asking it, or is she telling you he was in the snow for hours, which could be a point that you could see the Commonwealth using, saying, see, she knew he was in the snow. Well, she didn't say it. She asked it, which is consistent with everything else we've heard in this case. And then we got into all of John O'Keefe and Karen Read's text messages back and forth on the 28th, leading up to them meeting up at CF McCarthy's. And the communication is not smooth. It is not easy. It is not clear. It is clear that they had disagreements overnight, like 27th into the morning, and that they were still not done. It seemed to me, and we have it all timestamped in the stream, so go back and watch the text Interpret them for yourself. That's what the jury will do. It seemed to me that she was trying to be like, I need to finish talking to this. And he's like, I don't want to talk about it right now. She's like, well, I want to finish talking about it because if we're going out tonight, I would like to have the conversation. He's like, I'm not having the conversation right now. She's like, but we need to have a conversation. He's like, I'm not having this. And that went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Though we saw more text messages than I remember in the first trial. They might have come in. I just don't remember them. But text messages about whether or not she had unfriended him on Facebook. And then if he's going to refriend her on Facebook. And then her hot water being out, which I do remember from last time. And then if they're all meeting up at CF McCarthy's. But if that exchange went pretty quickly and is most of the day in court today if you want to see those text messages back and forth. And then ending the day with, well, clips of interviews that we did not see in the last trial. And the prosecution, I think, organized them very well because it was clip after clip after clip of interviews and different ones of Karen Read talking about drinking that night and her different variations of, well, this is how the drinks went. And it's the first time I've heard her explain, well, the drinks at CF McCarthy's were weak. They were vodka tonics, but they just tasted all like soda water and lime. So John said, we'll just get a shot and put it in and mix it yourself. And she's like, so for my taste, they were really weak. So I just got a shot and put it in because that made it like a normal vodka tonic. She's like, I'm not like drinking martinis. And she said something about martinis. I'm paraphrasing, but it's not like they're martinis. It's not like they're just straight vodka with like a spritz, like a twist of lemon, carcass out. Not at all what she was saying. She was saying they were weak. I put shots in, but she was going through what the Commonwealth will see. And if you haven't watched this trial yet, we haven't gotten there in testimony yet, but the Commonwealth put in testimony of the last trial about whether it was 9 drinks that she had. And she was saying, well, no, it's really, this one's really weak. And I put a shot in. They're counting it as 2. I'm counting it as 1. But the very last clip they played had Karen Read talking about being intoxicated. And she said, I'm buzzed. I'm happy. And in that last clip saying, I'm fuzzy. I'm not as clear as I would be if I hadn't been drinking, but I had been drinking. And, I was taking side roads. I wouldn't have driven on the highway. I wouldn't have driven on the interstate, but I was taking side roads and I drive slow if I'd been drinking and was going to drive. And so was talking about not just drinking and driving this time, but to me, it sounded like saying, well, when I do have drinks and drive, I drive slow. And I saw myself doing that in these videos. So I know that I wasn't driving recklessly, which will go to count 2. I know that I wasn't driving recklessly, even though I had had drinks and was driving. So we had Karen Read's conversation about drinking and driving from her. So I wonder if when we get to the testimony about what her blood alcohol was in the morning of January 29th, if that testimony will hit this jury different because they're going to hear it after they've heard Karen Read saying, well, I was buzzed and I had been drinking, but I drive carefully when I drive under the influence. Because now they have her saying, yes, I was driving under the influence. Will the testimony about her BAC be received differently? Will the defense approach that information differently? And I have to wonder if that will be the next evidence we hear, because with the confusion about the witnesses today, we heard from Brennan saying, well, the next witness up after they do a jury view is going to be the person talking about the lab procedures. I wonder if that is the lab procedures with regard to Karen Read's blood draw, and that's the next information the jury is going to hear. It makes logical sense that we would get to that information next. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss updates on your favorite cases.
Okay, so that completes day 3. We are going to go ahead and go to day 4. So day 4 is approximately about 16 minutes long, give or take. You just that way. And we will pause that. Turn that back on, and this will be the last one from this recap set.
But today we are going to jump back in time. We're going to just hop in the TARDIS and all go together, or DeLorean, pick your nerd. We are going to go back in time and cover day 4 of the Karen Read trial from Friday, 4/25. It is a short day. It was a half day in court. It's the day they did the jury view. It was a pretty quick day with only 2 witnesses. We're going to take a look at those 2 witnesses together. We're going to hear as best we can what the attorneys had to say about the jury view. We can talk a little bit about what a jury view is or is not. and cover those two witnesses as we jump back in time. Day 3, we heard from Daniel Whitley from the Canton Fire Department. We heard from the general manager of CF McCarthy's, the keeper of records for the Waterfall Bar and Grill, and then Mike Camerano. And then at the end of day 3, Trooper Garino came in and read those back and forth text messages between Karen Reed and John O'Keefe back and forth, where it was like, are you coming here? I don't know if I'm coming here. Are you coming over? But the water heater, those text messages. So that's what we're coming into now. So we know from the prosecution what they want the jury to take a look at. They want the jury to pay attention to the Lexus, to the right rear tail light, the height of the bumper, the height of the hatchback. The note that the visibility is different, I think, is obvious, but it felt necessary to point out these are local jurors. There's a reason there are local jurors. It's because they understand where they live. So telling them that the weather in April is different than the weather in January feels obvious, but they wanted to point out the visibility is different. The weather's different. Take a look at the flagpole. Take a look at the fire hydrant. Take a look at the Lexus. Take a look at the height of the bumper and the height of the berm on the car. Just take a look. You will do a proper investigation is not really a proper opening because the jurors aren't allowed to investigate. They're only allowed to observe. I have not seen this jury. We will not see this jury. So this is all hyperbole from me. But if there was a juror that looked about 6'2", they can't look at the 6'2" juror and be like, oh, go stand by the Lexus. Let's see like where the Lexus squares up on your body. Go stand next to it. We're going to run a little experiment. Let's like roll down the lawn and see. They're allowed to observe. They're not allowed to investigate. And the defense made a few references to your investigation. I understand that it ties back into their opening. I think it was better placed in their opening when they say you will pay better attention to this case than the investigators did. But asking them to investigate is tenuous because you're almost inviting improper jury behavior. They can't investigate. They can't just grab their phone, go drive around and see if it registers steps. And they might be tempted to. Ending the opening with, you will do a proper investigation is rough.
All right, jurors, I have to make something very clear. So the purpose of this view is to help you better to understand the evidence that you'll hear during the trial and to help you appreciate the location and its surroundings. The view you'll take is part of this case. The observations that you make while on the view may be used and considered by you in your deliberations in reaching a verdict. So at the end of the trial, when I explain to you what is evidence and what is not, I'll remind you that your observations on this view can be used by you in your deliberations. Also, while you're in the view, the same way you're not to take any notes or photographs, you're not to conduct any investigation on this case. You really are simply to stop and look, okay? Those are the instructions. We will see you in a few minutes.
She wouldn't have reread the instructions if Yannetti had said, we trust that you will observe 34 Fairview so you understand the testimony that comes in. That would have been completely fine. But saying and ending it with, we trust you'll do a proper investigation is rough. The first time he said investigation within these four walls. But the second time he said it, we trust you will do a proper investigation. I understand more and more why the court is so frustrated with the constant pushing of the line.
You were talking about an argument that they had, and then she was upset, and you were paraphrasing her. And one of the things that you paraphrased was, in fact, your statement was she was upset that was like her last words to him, correct?
Like
she
her last words to him.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Were you also made aware, did she tell you that her last words to him were in voicemails? Did she say that?
There it is.
She didn't give any details.
Did you ask her, what were your last words to him?
I did not.
Did she ever say whether or not she
Good
believed
questions for him.
he ever received her last words to him?
There's no other details there was no other details other than what
Those
she
are
said.
good. That's a good line of questioning.
But she did, when she was having this conversation with you about her last words to him, she did actually take out her phone and show you a bunch of missed calls to him at the same time, didn't she?
She tried to, yes.
Okay.
Interesting.
In your mind, did you put two and two together that what she was actually talking about with the missed calls and her being upset about her last words to him, being very angry on those missed calls, those voicemails? Did you put those two things together?
I didn't.
Okay. Thank you.
Her last thing that she had said to him was an argument. Did she ever suggest that was in a voicemail?
Objection.
Did she ever suggest it was in a voicemail?
She did not.
Did she ever suggest that she didn't actually speak to him, but instead it was some type of message?
Objection.
Did she ever suggest that?
She did not.
In fact, you wrote a report saying that there was an argument earlier in the night, didn't you?
Objection. Your Honor.
Sustained.
You then were interviewed, weren't you? You
Yes.
interviewed on February 14th, 2022?
Yes.
And you referred to the fact that she told you there was an argument earlier in the night?
Argument early in the night.
And she was telling you this when you were speaking to her that morning?
Correct. Around 6 a.m. Yes.
And earlier in the night, do you know if she was referring to 12:30
I did not know.
or 12:15
No.
or midnight?
I didn't know the time.
So his answer is he doesn't know.
You were asked on redirect examination by Mr. Brennan whether earlier in the night could have been 12 or 12:15 a.m., correct?
That's what he asked, yes.
And earlier in the night could have been 6 o'clock p.m.
Early in the night. Yeah, correct.
Could have been 5 o'clock p.m.
Could have been.
Could have been 7 o'clock p.m.
Sure.
Okay. You were also asked whether or not Ms. Reed actually specifically mentioned voicemails when she talked about those last words. And you said she didn't.
That I remember. Correct.
But she did show you her phone.
She tried to.
And she did show you a bunch of missed calls to John O'Keefe, correct?
I wasn't going to look through her phone. I don't know who she called.
Thank you. That's all.
Just 2 witnesses testified on day 4. We got into the paramedic partner of Dan Whitley, who was with him when he transported Karen Reed to the ER on the Section 12. And we got into the foundation from Good Samaritan drawing Karen Reed's blood after the jury view. I think the points that were really made on the first witness with regard to Good Samaritan is that the Good Samaritan Hospital lab is a medical lab, not a forensic lab. I know in the first trial, the defense brought a lot of points about the difference between the lab testing, the fact that the blood taken from Karen Reed was not being tested for forensic purposes. It was being tested for treatment purposes. I have to wonder if in this trial, with the various clips of her that the jury's already seen where she's talking about drinking and driving, if it will matter that much, or if they are going to say, yes, she was drinking and driving that evening. We've heard her talk about it now, saying in clips things like, oh, I can see in the videos of me driving, I'm driving slowly, and that's how I drive when I drink and drive. And her talking about, well, the Commonwealth is saying I did 9 drinks, but it was really more like 6 drinks, and the drinks were really weak, so I was putting shots into the drinks because they were weak, and I didn't drink all of this shot, and I didn't do this and that. It's going to be interesting to see if the point about the blood draw matters as much now that we have those interviews that Karen Reed did between the 2 trials, and even some of the interviews that weren't brought in at the last trial, but are being used now. I don't know if the difference between the medical lab and forensic lab will really matter to the jury all that much. Then we got to the paramedic. What stuck out to me in cross-examination is that Jackson was asking about Karen Reed's last words or conversation with John O'Keefe and how this paramedic remembers what she said. Did she say she was upset because of her last words to the decedent, John O'Keefe, or was she upset because of her last conversation? I think it's a point that matters very much because last conversation could well be in the car at 34 Fairview, where last words could well be interpreted as the voicemails that are yet to come into evidence. And I think Jackson made a good point that I don't remember from the first trial, where he said, and when she was saying her last words, she was showing you how many missed calls were on her phone. And we know that Brennan was worried about this point because in redirect, that is what he was hammering in on, that Karen Read never said voicemails. She said their last conversation was an argument. It will be for the jury to decide how they interpret the paramedic's words, saying her last words to him, her last conversation with him, and seeming to use those a bit interchangeably as he was summarizing what he remembered. The reason he was asking Karen Read those questions is because of the Section 12. She had said to her father, if he doesn't live, I don't want to live. I'm not going to be able to take care of the kids. She said that part to paramedics as well. And they were inquiring about that before taking her on the Section 12 hold. And she said, essentially, I don't literally mean those words that I'm not going to live. There's not a plan, but I'm upset because our last words or conversation were an argument. And they were talking about an argument earlier in the evening. And Hank Brennan was saying earlier in the evening could be 12:30. And Jackson said earlier in the evening could be 6 p.m. because the jury has seen all the text messages between Karen Read earlier in the evening with John O'Keefe, going back and forth about the Facebook friending and the hot water heater and alluding to an argument they had had the night before that and had woken up in the morning and was still carrying over because they had not resolved the disagreements that they were having in their relationships that had spilled into the day of the 28th and then overnight into the 29th and the morning of the 29th. It will be up for the jury to decide. I think good points were made on the cross-examination, but the jury hasn't heard the voicemails yet. So will those points be remembered by the time we get there? Maybe. But I think they did a good job of pointing out that there are two interpretations of what Karen Read is saying to law enforcement. Remember, at the end of this case, we will get to the jury instruction that says, if there are two reasonable interpretations, you must pick the interpretation that leads to innocence. And that is one of the things when you have cases with circumstantial evidence, the jury gets to interpret what that evidence means. And the jury instructions tell them that that interpretation, if two are reasonable, must point towards innocence. And that is why we are seeing the arguments of both sides are going to continue to come up. And the interpretations of things two ways are going to continue to come up. You build the case towards your closing. And I think we're seeing both sides bring in the points. Like you can almost, for me, see the bullet points that the attorneys are highlighting that they want to make in closing. And you can feel that today the defense was like, and I want to argue she was upset because she thought John O'Keefe heard the voicemails. That takeaway undercuts count 1 and count 3 significantly if the jury believes that part of the reason Karen Read is so upset the morning of the 29th when they find John O'Keefe is because she thinks he might have heard all of the voicemails that she left him and that those were her last words. The prosecution, of course, is going to argue that their last words were a fight in the vehicle at 34 Fairview. However, I also think it could be both. And I think we are going to see clips of interviews where Karen Read talks about the fact that they were having discourse at 34 Fairview about whether John was going into the house, whether he was going to come out and tell her if they were going to the party or not. And we haven't seen those clips to my memory yet, but we will, I think, see those clips of her talking about John going into 34 Fairview and her waiting and waiting outside. But then again, maybe we won't. That's my memory from watching some of the docuseries, So I think that might be where they're going. But we'll see if they choose to play that clip or not. Maybe they won't, because in that clip, she says that John O'Keefe goes into the house at 34 Fairview. So maybe the prosecution will choose to leave that out. And remember, the defense can't bring those clips in themselves. If they want Karen Read to talk about it, then they have to put Karen Read on the stand to explain, yeah, when I drove away from 34 Fairview, I was pissed because I was sitting outside in the car waiting for him to come back out of 34 Fairview, and he didn't. And I was mad, so I left, because the defense can't bring it in through the interviews. Maybe the prosecution will, maybe they won't. We're going to have to wait and see. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss updates on your favorite cases, you're going to need the Law Nerd app at lawnerd.app.com. That way you can stay in the loop on the cases that matter most to you, and you never know when you're going to catch feelings for a new case. So make sure you get it for free on iOS and Android. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a Law Nerd.